Omarion Hampton is one of the best picks you can make in your rookie drafts. We'll tell you why on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we are previewing North Carolina running back Omarion Hampton as we get ready for the NFL Combine next week. Kate, we've already talked about Ashton Jeanty. We've already talked about Caleb Williams. If you've missed those shows, please go check them out. Let's talk about Hampton, who has some mixed reviews in the Dynasty community. What did you think when you turned on his tape?
He is the prototypical bruiser, 3-down back. He has been one of my favorite prospects to watch. And spoiler alert, I like him more than Caleb Johnson, which,
getting that out of the way already.
Yeah, I just want to get that off my chest. It's something that I've been carrying around. It's weighted heavily on me. But let's talk about the basics. So Omarion Hampton, running back out of North Carolina. He's 21 years old, coming out as a junior, former 4-star recruit. He is a great blend of athleticism and size. 6 foot, 220 pounds. And this dude is just a bulldozer, Marcus. He has size, strength, and aggression mixed with plenty of burst that gives him, I think, a lot of upside for dynasty managers that people are, A, going to love to watch, but B, people are going to really enjoy him because I think he's the type of back that isn't going to leave the field very often, which is going to result in plenty of upside in the right system.
Yeah, I just don't think there are very many backs in the NFL that are like this, that are over 220 pounds. I've got his official measurements here from last spring, 225, just a shade under 6 foot, expected to run in the mid 4.4s at the NFL Combine next week. And you look at like the list of running backs in the NFL that are doing this, and the list is small. Like, honestly, the names we have that hit the plus 220, under 4.5 is like Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, and that's just about it. There aren't very many of those running backs out there, Kate. Now, I don't think he's Jonathan Taylor, and I don't think he's obviously Saquon Barkley, but I do think he's the prototype running back of somebody that's got good size, good speed, plays with power, plays with aggression. I just think he's a very, very well-rounded running back.
Super well-rounded. And what you have to love about Omarion Hampton is the fact that he's got back-to-back seasons of outstanding production. Led the ACC in scrimmage yards in 2024. He has back-to-back seasons in his sophomore and junior campaigns with over 1,500 rushing yards. He's seen his yards per game increase year over year. Seen his yards per reception increase year over year, overall target share increase year over year. He was a bona fide workhorse that improved season over season. But I do think the fact that we saw him post, 1,700 scrimmage yards and 16 touchdowns as a sophomore tells us a lot about the floor and the type of floor that you're going to get from this guy on a year-to-year basis.
Well, and Kate, leave those numbers up right now if you're watching with us on YouTube. But you saw as a sophomore last year playing with Drake May, a really efficient player. And you would think with Drake May leaving and the quarterback situation just being much, much worse, that you would see a drop in his efficiency with defenses game planning for him. No, that wasn't the case. It remained the same, 5.9 yards per attempt. He averaged more rushing yards per game. He became more involved as a receiver. And one of the things I like about him this year is in the 12 games that he played, he ran for 100 yards or more in 10 of the 12 games. So he was somebody that you could just set your clock to every single week because you knew he was going to produce on an offense that really didn't have a lot of talent outside of him. One of their guards was literally 5'10", 270 pounds, and Hampton was still able to be an effective running back. I understand some of the concerns where some people think he's maybe a little bit tight-hipped. He's not the most creative running back. I don't. We have like Breece Hall, who was like 219 coming out, ran in the 4.3s. I don't think he's like that in terms of like shiftiness or creativity. But if you want a big back with some power and some home run speed, I think Hampton's your guy.
I think he's a really good blend of that, right? Like he's not the Kenneth Walker, he's not the Breece Hall with that type of top end speed, but he's not slow by any means. Like the amount of burst that he shows through the hole is absolutely incredible. Omarion Hampton, when he is running up the middle, he doesn't need these huge lanes that to be blocked.
No.
He's able to find, I think, some of the skinnier holes in the offensive line in that blocking scheme and make a lot out of what sometimes appeared to be pretty much nothing. Lots of explosivity to his game, a lot of toughness to his game, a lot of contact balance. And I think that's what kind of differentiates him for me in terms of like Caleb Johnson. We talked about him as a runner that, has a lot of vision, can read offensive line and blocking schemes really well, but we want him to land with a good offensive line. I feel like Omarion Hampton for me is a little bit more foolproof in the fact that I think he can go to a team without a perfect offensive line and still be a decent bulldozer because I think he's got, really strong legs. He's got absolutely grinder of legs. I mean, just constantly churning behind that line of scrimmage. But he's also kind of able to find these smaller holes and make something out of nothing to the point where I'm not as worried if he doesn't go to a team with a perfectly established offensive line. I think he's still going to be able to make some things happen.
He's just a really good, sound player. Now, I don't know if he should be a first-round pick. But then again, like if I'm cross comparing him to like Najee Harris and Travis Etienne, who were first-round picks in the 2021 draft, I like him better than both of those players. And with this being a relatively weak overall draft, maybe he does slide into round one because he is a very well-rounded player. Continue to say that. But my hope is that he is a more of a round two guy because that's just kind of where I see him. But Kate, this is a very solid running back that we want in our dynasty leagues because he never has to come off the field, right? He can be effective in the passing game. We looked at Caleb Johnson yesterday, only had 30 career catches. Hampton had 39 during this year. Now he's not a Christian McCaffrey where you're going to put him in the slot and run routes, but like very soft and effective hands on dump offs, on screens, short passing game. We'll talk about some comps later in the show, but there's just not a lot to not like here because he's just so good at everything.
And I do think, the softness of the hands, the ability to take those dump offs and be effective with them. Like I think, regardless of your offensive line situation, has proven that, he can use those dump offs, those screens, those short passes and use them as an extension of the run game. We saw this. I'm going to use Rachaad White with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as an example of, they didn't have a great offensive line. Rachaad White was struggling with efficiency. So they used Rachaad White as a receiver, as I think an extension of that run game. Omarion Hampton can absolutely fill that kind of role. But I mean, I don't want him to because I want to see him with the ball in his hands bursting through the line of scrimmage. And that's where he just imposes his will.
It's funny that you mentioned Rachaad White. I was doing some digging this morning on some just like what people are saying about Hampton. And that was actually one of the comps that I read for was Rachaad White. I just think he's a much better
I think he's so much better.
Yeah, and I think his aggressiveness and that play style is just going to play way better in the NFL. We'll get to comps later. I've got one that I really like, so make sure you tune in for that. Okay, let's dive into the analytics here because I think they're going to tell a pretty good story about what Omarion Hampton could do at the next level. We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or just want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting because there's some times where I'll miss the opening tip off, but I still want to bet on the game. You can do that with the FanDuel app. Plus, the app is so easy to use. And when you win, you will get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. And make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Okay, let's dive into the analytics with Omarion Hampton because I would assume they're pretty good.
They are pretty good. I don't know what gave it away, but it's not just the box score that makes Omarion Hampton so special in terms of his floor. His advanced metrics were also pretty spectacular. In terms of his overall PFF percentiles, 88th percentile PFF rushing grade, 80th percentile missed first tackles per attempt, 97th percentile yards after contact per attempt. We love that for Omarion Hampton. And it shows up every time he touches the football and makes contact with the defender. 74th percentile PFF receiving grade, 57th percentile missed forced tackles per reception. The analytics profile is very kind to Omarion Hampton and exhibits, I think, a lot of the things that make him so special on an every down basis, especially those yards after contact, which he gains. Like every yard that man has, he works for it and he works for it hard. He's just an absolute grinder who does not go down on the first touch. And you love to see that, but you also love to see the fact that like he's still got that breakaway component to help extend plays in just about every way.
A couple other ones I wanted to mention. We saw with Genty and Caleb Johnson, both of their yards per carry numbers dropped as the season went on. That wasn't the case for Hampton. 6.3 in September, did drop down to 5.2 in October. Just didn't play as many games in October because of the way the schedule worked out. But back in November, 100 carries, averaged 6.5 yards per carry in the month of November. So that's a great sign. Like he's able to hold up. His body was able to hold up as the season went along, actually became a more effective receiver as the year went on. In terms of the production by quarter, 5.9 yards per carry in the first quarter, 6 in the second, 6 in the third, 5.6 in the fourth. Just, again, very steady. Not any of these peaks and valleys. And the last thing that I like to look at is how you perform on 1st and 10. That's the most common run down in the NFL. 6.4 yards per carry, 149 carries, 951 yards, 6.4 yards per rush. Just really solid all the way across the board. To me, he's one of these players, Kate, that's just a box checker, right? Like you want to check all these boxes. Does he have the size? Yes. Does he have the speed? Yes. What about the production? Yes. Analytics? Yes. There's just nothing that's left open. And then even injuries, like no injury history here to be worried about. Again, is he a special running back that we're considering in the Ashton Genty range? Probably not. But man, we see these type of running backs all the time work out in the NFL when you just don't really have any holes.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind for me, the word that comes to mind when it comes to Omarion Hampton is floor. Like he's got a high floor. And I think what all the aspects that you mentioned here, the production profile, the analytic profile, all of these things together, I think point to the fact that I think Omarion Hampton on a annual basis, like maybe he doesn't have the ceiling, the top 3 ceiling of a Saquon Barkley or an Ashton Genty, but I think could I predict Omarion Hampton to be a top 12 running back for the next 4 years to come?
Of course.
Absolutely. And one other advanced metric that I would like to point out per PFF, this is an unstable metric, but one that I think is pretty telling of just how much Omarion Hampton did. 10th percentile in terms of yards before contact. So when we're looking at like what did his offensive line block for him versus what did he create with his own natural power, over the last 2 years, he ranked in the 10th percentile for yards before contact.
Crazy.
that means that his offensive line is letting up. They're getting to him further in the backfield than most running backs are getting to in the backfield. Like Omarion Hampton, he was able to create despite those inefficiencies on the offensive line. And I think that's just so telling to who he is as a player and the type of player that he is. Like the strength, the just churning that he does with his legs. He is so fun to watch, Marcus.
Yeah, he is fun to watch. Let's go through some teams because I think much like Caleb Johnson, I think the range that he starts being an option really is like once you start to get to the 20s. I think the Steelers are 21 are the absolute ceiling. I can't see him going higher than that. But you look at teams behind the Steelers, like the Chargers, I think could be interested. I think Minnesota could be interested. Houston. Where would you like to see him land?
Like I said, I do think in general, he feels a little bit more foolproof, but I think the de facto answer that I'm going to have for most running backs that I really like is the Los Angeles Chargers, who they have this scheme with Greg Roman that I think, Omarion Hampton with his downhill physical run style could complement pretty well. And I do think that, his efficiency in the ground is going to improve. I think that's what they're trying to do, right? They're trying to create this efficiency in the run game to complement the efficiency in the passing game to find this perfect balance. I think Omarion Hampton with his physical running style could be a really nice complement to that.
I really like the Browns at pick 33. We'll see if the Browns want to spend a pick there, but it does seem like they're going to be moving on from Nick Chubb. He just wasn't the same last year. Jerome Ford was a fine part-time player, but not a full-time running back. I think Hampton in that Kevin Stefanski offense, where it's generally pretty good setup for the running backs, I do think that would work out really well. But my favorite fit would be like Minnesota because we'll see what happens with Aaron Jones if the Vikings decide to bring him back. But I think it's pretty clear that Kevin O'Connell wants to have a strong run game. And I think Hampton is just a much, much better player than Aaron Jones. And if you have J.J. McCarthy, you're going to want to make sure you run the ball. Having Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and T.J. Hawkinson and Hampton, I think that's a really fun fit. And I just wonder with Minnesota, like I think they're trying to win right now with a quarterback on a rookie contract. I think that's a good landing spot for him.
Yeah, and I like the fit a little bit, or I think the fit is maybe a little bit more logical than it is with the Browns, just because of the fact that Minnesota, I think, is in a better position to win now with their current roster. The Browns, I think, just have more holes that they need to address, that it becomes a little harder to justify a second-round running back, an early second-round running back at that.
But he might just be the best player available on the board by far. And it's not like it's a luxury pick when you're considering the holes they have in the roster. That I 100% agree with you.
Yeah.
But it's also a need for the Browns at the same time, right? So that's where it gets tricky. I just won't be surprised, Kate, in this draft if teams are like, you know what? We know it's not the most valuable position, but Hampton is just our best guy on the board by miles. Let's take him and then not have to worry about that position again.
I mean, I think that's fair. If you take Omarion Hampton, I think you're pretty well set at the position for the years to come, barring something very unexpected, some kind of injury. Because again, I firmly believe in the safety of the floor of Omarion Hampton. Yep. But I think the biggest takeaway here from this conversation with me, Marcus, is that you just want Omarion Hampton to play for a coach named Kevin. It seems to be the resounding theme. Kevin O'Connell, Kevin Stefanski. It doesn't really matter. Do we have any other Kevins here that we need to?
No. Or I'm going to bend. I can see him. We're going to get to comps again in a second, but like I think with the Bears, who want to be a little bit more physical on their offensive line, but you want your running back to be able to catch the ball out of the backfield. Who the Bears have pick 40. Oh, sorry, the Bears have two picks here. Pick 39 and pick 41. You're telling me if they pick him, like we're not talking about him instantly as a top 12, top 13 dynasty running back, Kate?
Oh, very easily. I think that would be such a fun pick. And the thing is, though, Marcus, there are not a lot of places that I could picture Omarion Hampton going to where he doesn't immediately look like a top 15 dynasty running back to me. I love the tape. I love everything about Omarion Hampton. There are some things that he can work on in terms of it's not like he ran a route tree necessarily. It's not like he's this sophisticated pass blocker, but I mean, none of the top running backs in this class have those specific attributes, I don't think. So for me,
I just think he's less scheme and team dependent than maybe Caleb Johnson. I think these guys are pretty close in terms of running backs, but I mean, there's like 9 different teams that you could tell me that would draft Omarion Hampton. I'd be like, stock up. Like I think he's pretty scheme proof. Okay, let's talk about some player comps for Omarion Hampton and his current dynasty value. We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every single day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Kate, let's talk about some player comps. I know player comps is one of the things that a lot of people struggle with, but did you happen to come up with the name here?
I didn't, but you came up with a name that I think people are going to really, really like when we're talking about projecting a ceiling for this specific player. Marcus, tell us your player comp for Omarion Hampton.
He reminds me a lot of like Joe Mixon early in his Cincinnati days before he lost a lot of his speed, but like the guy that we saw at Oklahoma, where a slashing running back that has power, has speed, can be used as a receiver out of the backfield. And remember, Mixon was a pretty good sized running back coming out of Oklahoma, 6'1" or just under 6'1", 225 pounds. I think Hampton is going to measure up very similar at the combine. I think Hampton's got more speed, but that type of player where Cincinnati did not have great offensive lines early in Mixon's career, and yet he still produced big-time fantasy numbers because of the way he plays, because he just played a million snaps and he was on the field all the time. I think Mixon, and I know the number doesn't help, number 28, but whenever I watch him, like, oh, that's the type of running back that I see, somebody who adds value to your offense as a big, explosive, aggressive running back.
Yeah. And again, coming back to the point that like, I think he's somebody that adds something regardless of your offensive line situation. The fact that he is and has been as durable as he has, Omarion Hampton has been in a full-time workhorse role for the last 2 seasons. And that has not played into any concerns regarding health. Now, let's talk about his dynasty value. Because I keep talking about the landscape at the running back position in dynasty. We have those running backs that we, know are locks for like the top 5, top 6, your Breece Halls, your Jahmyr Gibbs, but after that, the cliff is pretty steep. And I actually think we can slate Omarion Hampton in here pretty high into our dynasty rankings. I'm going to name some players, and then I want you to tell me, obviously not knowing Omarion Hampton's landing spot, but knowing that we've both agreed that he's less landing spot dependent than maybe a Caleb Johnson. I'm going to name some players. You tell me, would you prefer this player or Omarion Hampton?
Cool. Let's do it.
Bucky Irving.
Hampton.
Kyron Williams.
Kyron.
James Cook.
Cook.
Josh Jacobs.
Hampton.
Derrick Henry.
Hampton.
Chase Brown.
Hampton.
Kenneth Walker.
Hampton.
Isaiah Pacheco.
I mean, so we're basically talking about Hampton already as a fringe RB or top 10 RB without even knowing the landing spot.
Yeah, pretty easily. And I know it's kind of weird because if you've, again, been listening to these player prospect previews, we've talked about Ashton Genty, Caleb Johnson in the same realm. But I think that speaks to the current landscape of the running back position in Dynasty, where these players are going to have some, I think, significant draft stock investment that is going to surpass some of the question marks that I think we have for a guy like, Josh Jacobs, a 31-year-old Derrick Henry, a Chase Brown. straight out of the gate, before even knowing landing spots, I want all 3 of these running backs as a top 12 potential asset.
And Kate, if you're in a super flex rookie draft here, probably starting in May, June, July, I got to assume Cam Ward, Shador are going to go high. Ashton Genty probably still going to be the number 1 overall pick. We're looking at, like, you might be able to get Hampton behind Tet McMillan, maybe behind Caleb Johnson, maybe behind even someone like Travion Henderson, who has a little bit more speed. But like in that mid round, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think that's the range for Hampton. And we just went through it. Like, even in a neutral landing spot, we're looking at him as a top 10 dynasty running back. And that's why at the top of the show, I said he might be one of the best picks that you could make in your rookie draft, because you're not having to trade all the way up to the top to get one of these running backs. You're getting him right in the mid rounds of the first round, or mid round of the first round. I think he's a fantastic pick.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a huge, huge value this offseason. And this has never been, I think, a more perfect time to have one of these picks in like the late first, because I do
100%.
think you're going to have a pretty significant wealth of options, because this isn't a top heavy, or this isn't a super like long and deep top heavy wide receiver class. This isn't a great quarterback class. Like, there's going to be a couple names at the top, like a Tet McMillan. Like, there's going to be some options there, but I do think the running back options around like, the 106 to 108, you could be finding yourself in a position to have a year 1 starter, an every down running back in that range. And it's not every year that you have that kind of option, especially in Dynasty.
Last thing before we go. I think the lower end comp, or maybe the more likely comp, is like a David Montgomery. And that's why I think the fit with the Bears is really interesting, right? Bears drafted David Montgomery, but now Ben Johnson running the Bears. I could see
David Montgomery, like my favorite value running back in all of Dynasty.
Well, I think he's got obviously more speed than David Montgomery, but I think he gives you a similar element to your offense. So I think that's probably in the more likely outcomes here. So again, still not a bad option. I know this isn't Locked on Cowboys, but we joked about Ashton Genty going to the Cowboys at 12. As much as I like Genty, why draft Genty at 12 if you can get Hampton in round 2? I think Genty's better, but I think Hampton can be a very, very good running back right away for a team like Dallas. I'm just using them as an example.
Man, if Omarion Hampton goes to the Cowboys, wheels up, I think he's like going to be at this time next year, RB7 in Dynasty. I'm going to make my bold prediction right now.
Yeah, there you go. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Make sure you check out the channel on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. We'll see you back here on Monday as we get ready for the NFL Combine.